He got fired for closing a deal too early. 10 years later, he was worth over $5 billion. This is not a movie script. This is a real story. And it happened to a guy who once sold garbage bags door to door just to survive. Welcome back to Broke to Billionaire. Today, we are breaking down the wild, messy, and honestly kind of insane journey of Mark Cuban. Stick around, because the middle of this story is way crazier than most people realize. Let's rewind all the way back to Pittsburgh. Mark Cuban was born in 1958 into a working-class family. His father installed upholstery in cars for a living. There was no trust fund waiting for him, no family business to inherit. If young Mark wanted money, he had to go get it himself. So that is exactly what he did. As a kid, he started selling garbage bags to neighbors, not because it was exciting, just because people needed them, and he figured out how to deliver. Later, he moved on to selling newspapers, then stamps, then coins, anything he could buy low and sell for a little more. It was not glamorous, but it was training. Every single one of those small hustles was quietly teaching him the one skill that would define his entire life. Find a need, fill it, repeat. He eventually enrolled at Indiana University, studying business, and even there, he could not sit still. He ran little side hustles on campus, including teaching disco dance lessons for extra cash. By the time he graduated in 1981, he already had the instincts of a hustler. What he did not have yet was direction. So he moved to Dallas, Texas, and took a job selling computer software. And here is where the story takes its first real turn. Cuban was actually great at the job. He understood the product, and he understood people. But one morning, a client wanted to close a deal early, before the store officially opened. Cuban made the call to help the customer first. His manager did not see it that way. He was fired, right there on the spot. Now, most people would panic. Cuban has said more than once that getting fired that day was one of the best things that ever happened to him, because it pushed him off the ledge and forced him to build something of his own. Sometimes, the worst moment of your career is actually a door swinging wide open. You just cannot see it yet. At this point, Cuban was pretty much broke. He was crashing in a crowded apartment with a bunch of roommates. No real savings, no safety net. But he had one thing going for him. This was the early 1980s, and personal computers were brand new. Most business owners had no idea how to use them, how to connect them, or how to make the software actually talk to each other. Cuban saw that confusion, and he saw an opportunity hiding inside it. In 1983, he co-founded a company called MicroSolutions. The idea was simple. He would walk into local businesses, set up their computer systems, and teach them how to actually use this confusing new technology. He was not a genius inventor. He was a translator, turning complicated tech into plain English for regular business owners. He worked brutal hours. He taught himself just enough to stay one step ahead of his own clients. And because barely anyone else was offering this kind of service yet, the business exploded. By the end of the decade, MicroSolutions was pulling in millions of dollars a year. In 1990, he sold the company to CompuServe for around $6 million. Mark Cuban was only 32 years old, and he had already built his first fortune from nothing. But this, believe it or not, was just the warm-up round. After the sale, Cuban took some time to enjoy his money. He traveled, he partied, he went to basketball games. But he never really stopped watching where technology was heading next. And in the mid-1990s, something started bothering him. He wanted to listen to his old college basketball games online, since he no longer lived close enough to catch them on the radio. The problem was, streaming audio over the internet barely existed yet. So, true to form, instead of complaining, he built the solution himself. In 1995, Cuban teamed up with his old college friend Todd Wagner, and they launched a company called AudioNet. The idea was to stream live radio, and eventually live sports and business events, straight over the internet. At the time, most people were using slow dial-up connections, and streaming was clunky at best. But Cuban pushed forward anyway. That company was later renamed Broadcast.com. and it rode the massive wave of the dot-com boom that was sweeping the entire country. Investors could not throw money fast enough at anything internet-related, and Broadcast.com became one of the hottest names in the entire industry. Then, in 1999, right at the peak of the dot-com frenzy, Yahoo bought Broadcast.com. The deal was worth roughly $5.7 billion, paid entirely in Yahoo stock. Just pause on that number for a second. $5.7 billion. Mark Cuban went from a $6 million exit to a billionaire in less than 10 years. But here is the part of the story that actually separates Cuban from most people who get rich quick. He did not just sit back and admire his Yahoo stock. He used a financial hedging strategy, essentially insurance for his shares, to lock in protection against a crash. And that decision turned out to be one of the smartest financial moves in modern business history, because barely a year later, the dot-com bubble completely collapsed. Yahoo stock crashed, along with almost every other internet company. Countless newly minted dot-com billionaires watched their entire fortunes disappear in months. Mark Cuban's hedge protected him. While plenty of his peers were wiped out completely, his fortune stayed largely intact. And that is a lesson worth repeating. Making money is one skill. Protecting money is a completely different skill. Cuban happened to master both at exactly the right moment. With his fortune secure, Cuban did something a lot of newly rich people only dream about. In the year 2000, he bought a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks, an NBA team that, at the time, was honestly kind of forgettable. The price tag was around $285 million. But Cuban did not buy the team just to sit courtside and look important. He got obsessed with actually making the Mavericks great. He poured money into better facilities, better player care, and early data analytics, years before analytics became a buzzword across professional sports. He also became famous, or maybe infamous, for constantly speaking his mind. He got fined by the league more times than almost any owner in its history for arguing with referees and calling out officials publicly. But underneath all that noise, there was a real strategy. Cuban treated the team like a business that needed constant improvement, not just an expensive toy. That strategy paid off in 2011, when the Dallas Mavericks won the NBA championship, beating LeBron James and the Miami Heat. It was one of the biggest underdog stories in league history. More recently, in late 2023, Cuban sold most of his stake in the team to the Adelson and Dumont family, while still staying involved in basketball decisions for a while afterward. Then, in 2011, the same year the Mavericks won it all, Cuban joined the cast of Shark Tank, and this is where a huge chunk of the world met him for the very first time. On the show, he built a reputation as blunt, sharp, and sometimes brutally honest. He was not afraid to tell an entrepreneur their idea simply would not work. But he also was not afraid to write huge checks the moment he saw real potential. Shark Tank did something clever for Cuban's career. It turned his business mind into entertainment. It made him one of the most recognizable business personalities on the planet, right up there with names like Warren Buffett, at least in terms of how many people instantly knew his face. That kind of visibility became its own asset, opening doors that money alone never could. And then, in 2022, Cuban launched something completely different from anything he had done before. A company called Cost Plus Drugs. The idea was simple, but genuinely disruptive. Sell generic prescription medications at radically transparent prices, with a small fixed markup, cutting out the layers of middlemen that inflate drug prices across the country. This was not about chasing another billion-dollar payday. By his own words, Cuban framed this as an attempt to fix a broken system that hurts everyday people. Out of everything he has built, this might be the venture that says the most about who he actually is today. So, what can we really take from Mark Cuban's entire journey? First, he never stopped noticing gaps: garbage bags, computer consulting, streaming audio, sports analytics, drug pricing. Completely different industries, but the exact same instinct every single time. Find a real problem and solve it before everyone else catches on. Second, timing and protection matter just as much as vision. Cuban did not just get lucky in the dot-com boom. He protected his winnings before the crash came, which is exactly why he is still a billionaire today, instead of just another cautionary tale. And third, reinvention never really stops. Most people who make one fortune spend the rest of their life just protecting it. Cuban kept building a sports franchise, a media brand, and now, a healthcare company aiming to change an entire industry. From selling garbage bags on the streets of Pittsburgh to reshaping how millions of Americans buy their medication. That is the journey of Mark Cuban, and honestly, it is proof that going from broke to billionaire is rarely a straight line. It is messy, it is risky, and most of the time, it starts with getting knocked down first. If this story hit different for you, make sure you are subscribed to Broke to Billionaire, because we break down stories exactly like this every single week. Let us know in the comments which entrepreneur you want us to cover next, and we will see you in the next one.